to installing the desert bumper. It's a little bit more involved as we're actually going to remove that front bulkhead to replace it. And one of the things that's going to happen is the lower arm bolts. We're going to have to get this thing up on stands and pull the lower arm bolts, as that's what holds this winch front bulkhead on. Once we get this out of there, we're going to replace it with the new bumper and bolt everything back together the way this came out. So since we have to take the lower arm bolts out, we got to get the car lifted off the ground, at least on the front. We're going to start first with taking these plastic bolts out. These are what holds the plastics to that bumper, or that bulkhead. So the sway bar is actually mounted on that front bulkhead of the bumper, so we're actually going to disconnect the sway bar so we can get it out easily. The wrench is just to keep it from spinning. It's a little hard to get in there, but we do this to both sides. We're going to remove these two bolts right here. There's one on this side, one on the other, using a 15mm. So the next two bolts are quite a bit harder to get to. We use a 13mm wrench, and the nut is welded to the frame, so you just got to loosen it from the outside, but you got to make very short moves on it to get it out. So this is the most difficult part of the installs. We need to take the lower arm bolts out. If you've never taken these out before, they're pretty tight from the factory. However, when we do take the bolts out, we have to be aware, wheels are off the ground right now. The arm's going to drop a little bit in the front, but it's still being retained in the back. So let's go ahead and get these out. Let's go ahead and pull this out. Now be careful because the radiator is being supported by this. So there's some little hooks on the frame, so when you lift the bumper up, it'll come free and you can drop this thing right now. So the next thing we need to do is trim the plastic so we can get as much ground clearance as possible with this bumper. We're not trimming much plastic, but there is a section here that will exist, and we just trim it up to about here, the corner of the bowl holes, and then across, and then you can use the bumper to figure out how much you want to trim. I trimmed it about a 1/4 inch extra all the way around so that it wouldn't rub the bumper. So now we're going to grab the bumper. We have the rubber piece from the factory bumper that goes into the radiator installed on the pins. We're just going to slip this in here. Pull the radiator forward. And then there's a little hook that it drops onto that holds it. Now it's in. So we're going to start by putting these bolts in at the top. It doesn't really matter what order you put them in as long as we get all the bolts back in. So these two bolts right here, they are for the factory sway bar mount. We are not putting the factory sway bar back on this install, but you're welcome to reinstall your factory sway bar and keep that factory position. The next bolt we're going to put in is the one that goes in the front of the bulkhead. There's two bolts. They're a little bit hard to get to, but you can get your hands in there. So now we're going to move on to the lower control arm bolts. Just going to push them back up. We're going to go ahead and torque the lower control arm bolts. Alright, we're going to put the factory bolts back into plastics, and we can slip a wrench right through here to get to the Torx bit. So for the lighting options, you can either directly mount light pods to it with the slotted holes and position them where you want them, or we have an optional double stack mount for the Onyx 6 light bar, and what this will do is make it so you can get that filled finish. So let's go ahead and pull this off and get this bracket on there, and then we'll bolt these back on. Alright, so since this thing is, all the bars are really close together, we're going to put the 3/8 bolts in first, and then we're going to mount our first light bar. It's important that we put the bolts in there first. As you can see, it'd be hard to get in there after. Now we have this on the bracket, we're going to go ahead and install this on the bumper. There's just enough room to fit a wrench in there. Alright, so our last step after everything is tight is we're going to put the skid plate on. And the skid plate is just 4 core 20 bolts. The nuts are welded to the back of the bumper, so it makes installation real easy. We're going to get all 4 threaded in before we tighten down. Alright, so that wraps up both the installations for both bumpers, our winch bumper and our Desert Series bumper. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and comment below, and we'll see you guys next time.